Game Preserve by Rog Phillips, originally published in If Worlds of Science Fiction, October 1957. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The first of the morons, as they were popularly called, though they were totally lacking in intelligence, were born in 1971, 11 years after the mutual retaliation phase of the big war that no one started, the majority of them near the big bombed-out cities. By 1973, with the aid of the electron microscope, the scientists had learned all about it. Parents and offspring were sterilized, and the offspring placed in state institutions. By 1983, there were too many of them. A new solution to the impossible situation was tried. Large isolated areas in the south where the climate was mild were made into preserves for them. In the wilds, the morons banded into small herds that showed no inclination to roam. By 1985, no more of the morons were being born, thanks to the sterilization of all parents carrying the contaminated gene. It was thought the problem was permanently solved through perfect cooperation between science, the government, and the public. If the contamination had not been weeded out of the race, 1/4 of every generation for all the future would have been without any intelligence whatever. But here and there had been natural births, unattended by a doctor, and parental love coupled with fear of being sterilized and thus denied further parenthood had brought into existence a few thousand unsterilized morons hidden away in attic rooms or in basements. And to these parents the preserves offered the logical solution too. Drive into the nearest preserve and turn the child loose with its kind. Thus a new generation came into being in the scattered herds, and by 2010 AD a new problem had come into being. Thanks to impurities in the moron strain, or to wandering renegades, or both, a few normally intelligent offspring were appearing in the herds. There was danger of these recontaminating the race if they left the herds, learned to speak, wear clothes. In 2010, the government attempted a mass sterilization of the herds, but the herds were too wild by now, and the males too dangerous, so the sterilization program was abandoned and a new plan substituted. The government hunters came into being, small patrol groups whose job was to pick off the renegades and any members of the herds that were intelligent. "Hi, hi, hi!" Big One shouted, and heaved erect with the front end of it. "Hi, hi, hi!" Fat One and the dozen others echoed more mildly, lifting wherever they could get a hold on it. It was lifted and borne forward in a half-crouching trot. "Hi, hi, 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 hi!" Elf chanted, running and skipping alongside the panting men and their massive burden. It was carried forward through the lush grass for perhaps 50 feet. "Ah, ah, ah!" Big One sighed loudly, slowly letting the front end of it down until it dug into the soft black soil. "Ah!" Fat One and the others sighed, letting go and standing up, stretching aching back muscles, rubbing cramped hands. "Ah, ah, 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 ah!" Elf sang, running around and in between the resting men. He came too close to Big One and was sent sprawling by a quick, good-humored push. Everyone laughed, Big One laughing the loudest. Then Big One lifted Elf to his feet and patted him on the back affectionately, a broad grin forming a toothy gap at the top of his bushy black beard. Elf answered the grin with one of his own, and at that moment his ever-present yearning to grow up to be the biggest and the strongest, like Big One, flowed through him with new strength. Abruptly, Big One leaped to the front end of it, shouting, "Hi, hi, hi!" "Hi, hi, hi!" the others echoed, scrambling to their places. Once again, it was borne forward for 50 feet, and again, across the broad meadowland. A vast matting of blackberry brambles came into view off to one side. Big One veered his course toward it. The going was uphill now, so the forward surges shortened to 40 feet, then 30. By the time they reached the blackberries, they were wet and glossy with sweat. It was a healthy patch, loaded with large ripe berries. The men ate hungrily at first, then more leisurely, pointing to one another's stained beards and laughing. As they denuded one area, they leaped to it, carried it another 10 feet, and started stripping another section, never getting more than a few feet from it. Elf picked his blackberries with first one, then another of the men. When his hunger was satisfied, he became mischievous, picking a handful of berries and squashing them against the back or the chest of the nearest man and running away, laughing. It was dangerous sport, he knew, because if one of them caught him, he would be tossed into the brambles. Eventually they all had their fill, and thanks to Elf looked as though they were oozing blackberry juice from every pore. The sun was in its mid-afternoon position. In the distance a line of white-barked trees could be seen, evidence of a stream. "Hi, hi, hi!" Big One shouted. The journey toward the trees began. It was mostly downhill, so the forward spurts were often as much as 100 feet. Before they could hear the water, they could smell it. They grunted their delight at the smell, a rich fish odor betokening plenty of food. Intermingled with this odor was the spicy scent of eucalyptus. They pushed forward with renewed zeal, so that the sweat ran down their skins, dissolving the berry juices and making rivulets that looked like purple blood. When less than 100 yards from the stream, which was still hidden beyond the tall grasses and the trees lining its bank, they heard the sound of voices, high-pitched, women's voices. They became uneasy and nervous. Their surges forward shortened to 10 feet. Their rest periods became longer. They searched worriedly for signs of motion through the trees. They changed their course to arrive 100 yards downstream from the source of the women's voices. Soon they reached the edge of the tree belt. It was more difficult to carry it through the scatterings of bushes. Too, they would get part way through the trees and run into trees too close together to get it past them, and have to back out and try another place. It took almost 2 hours to work through the trees to the bank of the stream. Only Elf recognized the place they finally broke through as the place they had left more than 2 days before. In that respect, he knew he was different, not only from Big One and the other grown-ups, but also all other elves except one, a girl elf. He had known it as long as he could remember. He had learned it from many little things. For example, he had recognized the place when they reached it. Big One and the others never remembered anything for long. In getting it through the trees, they blundered as they always had, and got through by trial and error, with no memory of past blunderings. Elf was different in another way, too. He could make more sounds than the others. Sometimes he would keep a little it with him until it gave him a feeling of security almost as strong as the big it, then wander off alone with it and play with making sounds. Bzz, bzz, walla, 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 roo, roo, la, loo, hee, da, and all kinds of sounds. It excited him to be able to make different sounds and put them together so that they pleased his hearing, but such sounds made the others avoid him and look at him from a safe distance with worried expressions, so he had learned not to make different sounds within earshot of the others. The women and elves were upstream 100 yards, where they always remained. From the way they were milling around and acting alarmed, it was evident to Elf they could no more remember the men having been here a few days before than the men could remember it themselves. It would be 2 or 3 days before they slowly lost their fear of one another. It would be the women and the elves who would cautiously approach, holding their portable its clutched for security, until, finally losing all fear, they would join into one big group for a while. Big One and the others carried it right to the water's edge, so they could get into the water without ever being far from it. They shivered and shouted excitedly as they bathed. Fat One screamed with delight as he held a squirming fish up for the others to see. He bit into it with strong white teeth, water dripping from his heavy brown beard. Renewed hunger possessed him. He gobbled the fish and began searching for another. He always caught 2 fish for any other man's one, which was why he was fat. Elf himself caught a fish. After eating it, he lay on the grassy bank looking up at the white billowing clouds in the blue sky. The sun was now near the horizon, half hidden behind a cloud, sending divergent ramps of light downward. The clouds on the western horizon were slowly taking on color until red, orange, and green separated into definite areas. The soft murmur of the stream formed a lazy background to the excited voices of the men. From upstream, faintly, drifted the woman and elf sounds. Here, close to the ground, the rich, earthy smell was stronger than that of the stream. After a time, a slight breeze sprang up, bringing with it other odors, that of distant pines, the pungent eucalyptus, a musky animal scent. Big One and the others were out of the water finally. Half asleep, Elf watched them move it up to dry ground. As though that was what the sun had been waiting for, it sank rapidly below the horizon. The clouds where the sun had been seemed now to blaze for a time with a smouldering redness that cooled to black. The stars came out, one by one. A multitude of snorings erupted into the night. Elf crept among the sleeping forms until he found Big One and settled down for the night, his head against Big One's chest, his right hand resting against the cool, smooth metal of it. Elf awoke with a bright morning sun directly in his eyes. Big One was gone, already wading in the stream after fish. Some of the others were with him. A few were still sleeping. Elf leaped to his feet, paused to stretch elaborately, then splashed into the stream. As soon as he caught a fish, he climbed out onto the bank and ate it. Then he turned to search for a little it. There were many lying around, all exactly alike. He studied several, not touching some, touching and even nudging others. Since they all looked alike, it was more a matter of feel than any real difference that he looked for. One, and only one, seemed to be the it. Elf returned his attention to it several times. Finally he picked it up and carried it over to the big it and hid it underneath. Big One, with shouts of sheer exuberance, climbed up onto the bank, dripping water. He grinned at Elf. Elf looked in the direction of the women and other elves. Some of them were wandering in his direction, each carrying an it of some sort, many of them similar to the one he had chosen. In sudden alarm at the thought that someone might steal his new it, Elf rescued it from its hiding place. He tried to hide it behind him when any of the men looked his way. They scorned an individual it, and, as men, preferred an it too heavy for one person. As the day advanced, women and elves approached nearer, pretending to be unaware at times that the men were here, at other times openly fleeing back, overcome by panic. The men never went farther than 20 feet from the big it, but as the women came closer, the men grew surly toward one another. By noon, 2 of them were trying to pick a fight with anyone who would stand up to them. Elf clutched his little it closely and moved cautiously downstream until he was 20 feet from the big it. Tentatively, he went another few feet, farther than any of the men dared go from the big it. At first he felt secure, then panic overcame him and he ran back, dropping the little it. He touched the big it until the panic was gone. After a while he went to the little it and picked it up. He walked around, carrying it, until he felt secure with it again. Finally he went downstream again, 20 feet, 25 feet, 30. He felt panic finally, but not overwhelmingly. When it became most unendurable, he calmly turned around and walked back. Confidence came to him. An hour later he went downstream until he was out of sight of the big it and the men. Security seemed to flow warmly from the little it. Excitement possessed Elf. He ran here and there, clutching it closely so as not to drop it and lose it. He felt free. "Biddle-boo," he said aloud, experimentally. He liked the sounds. "Biddle-boo, biddle-boo, biddle-boo." He saw a berry bush ahead and ran to it to munch on the delicious fruit. "Riddle-piddle-biddle," he said. It sounded nice. He ran on, and after a time he found a soft grassy spot and stretched out on his back, holding it carelessly in one hand. He looked up and up at a layer of clouds going in one direction and another layer above it going in another direction. Suddenly he heard voices. At first he thought the wind must have changed so that it was carrying the voices of the men to him. He lay there, listening. Slowly he realized these voices were different. They were putting sounds together like those he made himself. A sense of wonder possessed him. How could there be anyone besides himself who could do that? Unafraid, yet filled with caution, he clutched it closely to his chest and stole in the direction of the sounds. After going 100 yards, he saw signs of movement through the trees. He dropped to the ground and lay still for a moment, then gained courage to rise cautiously, ready to run. Stooping low, he stole forward until he could see several moving figures. Darting from tree to tree, he moved closer to them, listening with greater excitement than he had ever known to the smoothly flowing variety of beautiful sounds they were making. This was something new, a sort of game they must be playing. One voice would make a string of sounds, then stop. Another would make a string of different sounds and stop. A third would take it up. They were good at it, too. But the closer he got to them, the more puzzled he became. They were shaped somewhat like people. They carried its. They had hands and faces like people. That's as far as the similarity went. Their feet were solid. Their arms, legs, and body were not skin at all, but strangely colored and unliving in appearance. Their faces were smooth like women's, their hair short like babies', their voices deep like men's. And the its they carried were unlike any elf had ever seen. Not only that, each of them carried more than one. That was an idea! Elf became so excited he almost forgot to keep hidden. If you had more than one it, then if something happened to one, you would still feel secure. He resisted the urge to return to the stream and search for another little it to give him extra security. If he did that, he might never again find these creatures that were so like men and yet so different. So instead, he filed the idea away to use at the earliest opportunity and followed the strange creatures, keeping well hidden from them. Soon Elf could hear the shouts of the men in the distance. From the behavior of the creatures ahead, they had heard those shouts too. They changed their direction so as to reach the stream 100 yards or more downstream at about the spot where Elf had left. They made no voice sounds now that Elf could hear. They clutched their strangely shaped long its before them tensely, as though feeling greater security that way, their heads turning this way and that as they searched for any movement ahead. They moved purposefully. An overwhelming sense of kinship brought tears to Elf's eyes. These creatures were his kind. Their differences from him were physical, and therefore superficial, and even if those differences were greater, it wouldn't have mattered. He wanted, suddenly, to run to them, but the thought of it sent fear through him. Also, they might run in panic from him if he suddenly revealed himself. It would have to be a mutual approach, he felt. He was used to seeing them now. In due time he would reveal himself for a brief moment to them. Later he would stay in the open and watch them, making no move to approach until they got used to him being around. It might take days, but eventually, he felt sure, he could join them without causing them to panic. After all, there had been the time when he absented himself from the men for 3 whole days, and when he returned they had forgotten him, and his sudden appearance in their midst had sent even Big One into spasms of fear. Unable to flee from the security of the big it, and unable to bear his presence among them without being used to him, they had all fallen on the ground in a fit. He had had to retreat and wait until they recovered. Then, slowly, he had let them get used to his being in sight before approaching again. It had taken 2 full days to get to the point where they would accept him once more. That experience, Elf felt, would be valuable to remember now. He wouldn't want to plunge these creatures into fits or see them scatter and run away. Also, he was too afraid right now to reveal himself, even though every atom of his being called for their companionship. Suddenly, he made another important discovery. Some of the its these creatures carried had something like pliable vines attached to them, so they could be hung about the neck. The thought was so staggering that Elf stopped and examined his it to see if that could be done to it. It was twice as long as his hand, and round one way, tapering to a small end that opened to the hollow inside. It was too smooth to hold with a pliable vine unless... He visualized pliable vines woven together to hold it. He wasn't sure how it could be done, but maybe it could. He set the idea aside for the future and caught up with the creatures again, looking at them with a new emotion, awe. The ideas he got just from watching them were so staggering he was getting dizzy. Another new thought hit him. He rejected it at once as being too fantastic. It returned. Leaves are thin and pliable, and can be wrapped around small objects like pebbles. Could it be that these creatures were really men of some sort, with bodies like men, covered with something thin like leaves are thin? It was a new and dizzy height in portable securities, and hardly likely. No. He rejected the idea with finality, and turned his mind to other things. He knew now where they could reach the stream. He decided to circle them and get ahead of them. For the next few minutes this occupied his full attention, leaving no room for crazy thoughts. He reached the stream and hid behind some bushes where he would have a quick line of retreat if necessary. He clutched it tightly and waited. In a few moments he saw the first of the creatures emerge 100 feet away. The others soon joined the first. Elf stole forward from concealment to concealment until he was only 15 feet from them. His heart was pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. His knuckles were white from clutching it. The creatures were still carrying on their game of making sounds, but now in an amazing new way that made them barely audible. Elf listened to the incredibly varied sounds, enraptured. "This colony seems to have remained pure. You never can tell. No, you never can tell. Get out the binoculars and look, Joe." "Not just yet, Harold. I'm looking to see if I can spot one whose behavior shows intelligence." Elf ached to imitate some of the beautiful combinations of sounds. He wanted to experiment and see if he could make the softly muted voices. He had an idea how it might be done. Not make a noise in your throat, but breathe out and form the sounds with your mouth, just like you were uttering them aloud. One of the creatures fumbled at an it hanging around its neck. The top of it hinged back. He reached in and brought out a gleaming it and held it so that it covered his eyes. He was facing toward the men upstream and stood up slowly. "See something, Joe?" Suddenly Elf was afraid. Was this some kind of magic? He had often puzzled over the problem of whether things were there when he didn't look at them. He had experimented, closing his eyes, then opening them suddenly to see if things were still there, and they always were. But maybe this was magic to make the men not be there. Elf waited, watching upstream, but Big One and the others did not vanish. The one called Joe chuckled. "The toy the adult males have would be a museum piece if it were intact. A 1960 Ford, I think. Only one wheel on it, right front." Elf's attention jerked back. One of the creatures were reaching over his shoulder, lifting on the large it fastened there. The top of the it pulled back. He reached inside, bringing out something that made Elf almost exclaim aloud. It was shaped exactly like the little it Elf was carrying, but it glistened in the sunlight, and its interior was filled with a richly brown fluid. "Anyone else want a Coke?" "This used to be a picnic area," the one called Joe said, not taking his eyes from the binoculars. "I can see a lot of pop bottles lying around in the general area of that wreck of a Ford." While Elf watched, breathless, the creature reached inside the skin of his hip and brought out a very small it and did something to the small end of the hollow it. Putting the very small it back under the skin of his hip, he put the hollow it to his lips and tilted it. Elf watched the brown liquid drain out. Here was magic. Such an it, the very one he carried, could be filled with water from the stream and carried around to drink any time. When the it held no more liquid, the creature dropped it to the ground. Elf could not take his eyes from it. He wanted it more than he had ever wanted anything. They might forget it. Sometimes the women dropped their its and forgot them, picking up another one instead, and these creatures had beardless faces like women. Besides, each of them carried so many its that they would feel just as secure without this one. So many its! One of the creatures held a flat white it in one hand, and a very slim it, shaped like a straight section of a bush stem, pointed at one end, with which he scratched on the white it at times, leaving black designs. "They're 14 males," the one called Joe whispered. The other wrote it down. The way these creatures did things, Elf decided, was very similar to the way Big One and the other men went at moving the big it. They were very much like men in their actions, these creatures. 85 or 6 females. See any signs of intelligent action yet? No. A couple of the males are fighting. Probably going to be a mating free-for-all tomorrow or next day. There's one. Just a minute, I want to make sure. It's a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Good forehead. Her eyes definitely lack that large marble-like quality of the submoron parent species. She's intelligent, all right. She's drawing something in the sand with a stick. Give me your rifle, Bill. It's got a better telescope sight on it than mine, and I don't want her to suffer. That little it, abandoned on the ground. Elf wanted it. One of the creatures would be sure to pick it up. Elf worried. He would never get it then. If only the creatures would go, or not notice him. If only... The creature with the thing over his eyes put it back where he had gotten it out of the thing hanging from his shoulder. He had taken one of the long slim things from another of the creatures and placed the thick end against his shoulder, the small end pointed upstream. The others were standing, their backs to Elf, all of them looking upstream. If they would remain that way, maybe he could dart out and get the little it. In another moment they might lose interest in whatever they were watching. Elf darted out from his concealment and grabbed the it off the ground, and in the same instant an ear-shattering sound erupted from the long slim thing against the creature's shoulder. "Got her," the creature said. Paralyzed with fright, Elf stood motionless. One of the creatures started to turn his way. At the last instant, Elf darted back to his place of concealment. His heart was pounding so loudly he felt sure they would hear it. "You're sure, Joe?" "Right through the head. She never knew what happened." Elf held the new it close to him, ready to run if he were discovered. He didn't dare look at it yet. It wouldn't notice if he just held it and felt it without looking at it. It was cold at first, colder than the water in the stream. Slowly it warmed. He dared to steal a quick glance at it. It gleamed at him as though possessed of inner life. A new feeling of security grew within him, greater than he had ever known. The other it, the one half filled with dried mud and deeply scratched from the violent rush of water over it when the stream went over its banks, lay forgotten at his feet. "Well, that finishes the survey trip for this time." Elf paid little attention to the voice whispers now, too wrapped up in his new feelings. "Yes, and quite a haul. 22 colonies, 3 more than 10 years ago. 14 of them uncontaminated, 7 with only 1 or 2 intelligent offspring to kill, only 1 colony so contaminated we had to wipe it out altogether, and 1 renegade. The renegades are growing scarcer every time. Another 10 or 20 years, and they'll be extinct. Then there won't be any more intelligent offspring in these colonies. Let's get going. It'll be dark in another hour or so." The creatures were hiding some of their its under their skin, in their carrying cases. There was a feeling about them of departure. Elf waited until they were on the move, back the way they had come. Then he followed at a safe distance. He debated whether to show himself now or wait. The sun was going down in the sky now. It wouldn't be long until it went down for the night. Should he wait until in the morning to let them get their first glimpse of him? He smiled to himself. He had plenty of time. Tomorrow and tomorrow. He would never return to Big One and the other men. Men or creatures, he would join with these new and wonderful creatures. They were his kind. He thought of the girl elf. They were her kind too. If he could only get her to come with him. On sudden impulse he decided to try. These creatures were going back the same way they had come. If he ran, and if she came right with him, they could catch up with the creatures before they went so far they would lose them. He turned back, going carefully until he could no longer see the creatures. Then he ran. He headed directly toward the place where the women and elves stayed. They would not be so easily alarmed as the men, because there were so many of them they couldn't remember one another, and one or more or less of the elves went unnoticed. When he reached the clearing, he slowed to a walk, looking for her. Ordinarily he didn't have to look much. She would see him and come to him, smiling in recognition of the fact that he was the only one like her. He became a little angry. Was she hiding? Then he saw her. He went to her. She was on her stomach, motionless as though asleep, but something was different. There was a hole in one side of her head, and on the opposite side it was torn open, red and greyish-white, with— He knelt down and touched her. She had the same inert feel to her that others had had who had never again moved. He studied her head curiously. He had never seen anything like this. He shook her. She remained limp. He sighed. He knew what would happen now. It was already happening. The odour was very faint yet, but she would not move again, and day after day the odour would get stronger. No one liked it. He would have to hurry, or he would lose the creatures. He turned and ran, never looking back. Once he started to cry, then stopped in surprise. Why had he been crying, he wondered. He hadn't hurt himself. He caught up with the creatures. They were hurrying now, their long slender its balanced on one shoulder, the big end resting in the palm of the hand. They no longer moved cautiously. Shortly it was new country. Elf had never been this far from the stream. Big One more or less led the men, and always more or less followed the same route in cross-country trips. The creatures didn't spend hours stumbling along impossible paths. They looked ahead of them and selected a way, and took it. Also, they didn't have a heavy it to transport, 50 feet at a time. Elf began to sense they had a destination in mind, probably the place they lived. Just ahead was a steep bank, higher than a man, running in a long line. The creatures climbed the bank and vanished on the other side. Cautiously Elf followed them, heading toward a large stone with it qualities at the top of the bank, from whose concealment he could see where they had gone without being seen. He reached it and cautiously peeked around it. Just below him were the creatures, but what amazed Elf was the sight of the big it. It was very much like the big it the men had, except that there were differences in shape, and instead of one round thing at one corner, it had one at each corner and rested on them so that it was held off the ground. It glistened instead of being dull. It had a strange odour that was quite strong. The creatures were putting some of their its into it. 2 of them had actually climbed into it, something neither Elf nor the men had ever dared to do with their own big it. Elf took his eyes off of it for a moment to marvel at the ground. It seemed made of stone, but such stone as he had never before seen. It was an even width, with edges going in straight lines that paralleled the long narrow hill on which he stood, and on the other side was a similar hill, extending as far as the eye could see. He returned his attention to the creatures and their big it. The creatures had all climbed into it now. Possibly they were settling down for the night, though it was still early for that. No matter. There was plenty of time. Tomorrow and tomorrow. Elf would show himself in the morning, then run away. He would come back again after a while and show himself a little longer, giving them time to get used to him so that they wouldn't panic. They were playing their game of making voice sounds to one another again. It seemed their major preoccupation. Elf thought how much fun it would be to be one of them, making voice sounds to his heart's content. "I don't see why the government doesn't wipe out the whole lot," one of them was saying. "It's hopeless to keep them alive. Feeble-mindedness is dominant in them. They can't be absorbed into the race again, and any intelligent offspring they get from mating with a renegade would start a long line of descendants, at least 1/4 of whom would be mindless idiots." "Well," another of them said, "it's one of those things where there is no answer. Wipe them out, and next year it would be all the blonde-haired people to be wiped out to keep the race of dark-haired people pure, or something. Probably in another 100 years, nature will take care of the problem by wiping them out for us. Meanwhile, we game wardens must make the rounds every 2 years and weed out any of them we can find that have intelligence." He looked up the embankment, but did not notice Elf's head, concealed partially by the grass around the concrete marker. "It's an easy job. Any of them we missed seeing this time we'll probably get next time. In the 6 or 8 visits we make before the intelligent ones can become adults and mate, we always find them." "What I hate is when they see us, those intelligent ones," a third voice said. "When they walk right up to us and want to be friends with us, it's too much like plain murder, except that they can't talk, and only make moronic sounds like biddle biddle biddle. Even so, it gets me when we kill them." The others laughed. Suddenly, Elf heard a new sound from the big it. It was not a voice sound, or if it was one that Elf felt he could not possibly match exactly. It was a growling. "Rrr, rrr, rrr." Suddenly it was replaced by still a different sound, a going very rapidly. Perhaps it was the way these creatures snored. It was not unpleasant. Elf cocked his head to one side, listening to the sound, smiling. How exciting it would be when he could join with these creatures. He wanted to so much. The big it began to move. In the first brief second, Elf could not believe his senses. How could it move without being carried? But it was moving, and the creatures didn't seem to be aware of it. Or perhaps they were too overcome by fear to leap out. Already the big it was moving faster than a walk, and was moving faster with every heartbeat. How could they remain unaware of it and not leap to safety? Belatedly, Elf abandoned caution and leaped down the embankment to the flat ribbon of rock, shouting. But already the big it was over 100 yards away, and moving faster now than birds in flight. He shouted, but the creatures didn't hear him. Or perhaps they were so overcome with fright that they were frozen. Yes, that must be it. Elf ran after the big it. If he could only catch up with it, he would gladly join the creatures in their fate. Better to die with them than to lose them. He ran and ran, refusing to believe he could never overtake the big it, even when it disappeared from view, going faster than the wind. He ran and ran until his legs could lift no more. Blinded by tears, he tripped and sprawled full length on the wide ribbon of stone. His nose bled from hitting the hard surface. His knees were scraped and bleeding. He was unaware of this. He was aware only that the creatures were gone, to what unimaginable fate he could not guess, but lost to him, perhaps forever. Sobs welled up within him, spilled out, shaking his small naked body. He cried as he hadn't cried since he was a baby. And the empty Coca-Cola bottle clutched forgotten in his hand glistened with the rays of the setting sun. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. Did this story make you feel something? Good. It means you're probably not a robot. You might still be an alien, though.